The doctors told Billionaire CEO Roy Hansen he was lucky to be alive. Roy disagreed. Because whoever had left him paralyzed had made one fatal mistake. They had left him alive. 6 months later, surrounded by armed security, world-class doctors, and people he believed he could trust, Roy was convinced the nightmare had ended. He couldn't have been more wrong. Because the first person to realize Roy Hansen was about to die wasn't a detective, wasn't one of his surgeons, and wasn't a single armed guard protecting his billion-dollar mansion. It was the chaotic young caregiver who arrived 27 minutes late for a job interview, carrying a canvas bag stuffed with a crushed sandwich, 2 eviction notices, and absolutely no idea that someone inside the house wanted the billionaire dead. Before we uncover how one ordinary woman changed a billionaire's life forever, take a moment to subscribe and let us know in the comments. Do you think Roy's accident was really an accident? Or was someone trying to finish what they started? Now, let's go back to the day Maria Talbert arrived 27 minutes late. Her bus had broken down 3 stops early, which meant the last half-mile to the Hansen estate was covered on foot, in blue scrubs, sweating through the strap of an oversized canvas bag stuffed with a crushed sandwich, 2 eviction notices, and a screwdriver she couldn't remember packing. The gates alone told her she was out of her depth. 12 feet of wrought iron, cameras swiveling on silent motors, and 2 men in tailored black suits that probably cost more than her aging sedan. "Interview," she called out, catching her breath. "Caregiver position. If you're also here for the caregiver position, I'd like to know now so I can save myself the embarrassment and go home." Neither man smiled. One murmured into a radio. A moment later, the massive iron gates clicked open. Inside, the mansion didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum that had forgotten how to breathe. Heavy curtains shut out the afternoon sun. Every polished surface looked untouched. Staff moved through the halls in near silence, speaking in the quiet voices usually reserved for hospitals. Maria's sneakers squeaked against the marble floor with every step, making her feel even more out of place. She didn't bother knocking. She was already 27 minutes late, and somewhere between the broken bus and the intimidating front gates, she'd convinced herself she'd already lost the job. The office was enormous. Dark walnut walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows hidden behind heavy drapes. A desk large enough to host a board meeting. But the man wasn't sitting behind it. He faced the window in a sleek black motorized wheelchair that looked less like medical equipment and more like something designed for a fighter jet. Even from behind, Roy Hansen didn't look diminished. Broad shoulders stretched the fabric of a perfectly tailored navy suit. His posture remained straight, commanding, almost defiant, as though refusing to let the chair beneath him define the man sitting in it. He didn't even bother turning around. "You're late." The bus had other plans. "I fired the last caregiver for speaking to me like I was a child." Maria let her oversized bag fall onto the nearest chair with an awkward thud. "Good news," she said. "I don't really do that voice." That finally made him turn. The quiet hum of the wheelchair filled the room as he faced her. His features were sharp and controlled. Handsome in the kind of intimidating way that suggested he'd spent his life making decisions other people obeyed without question. His eyes swept over her once, noticing everything. The loose bun, the wrinkled scrubs, the mismatched socks peeking above her sneakers, and the fact that she'd wandered 3 steps into his office without realizing how close she stood to the marble pedestal beside her. She bumped it half a second later. The abstract steel sculpture tilted dangerously. One of the bodyguards lunged forward and caught it inches before it shattered across the floor. Roy watched the entire thing without so much as blinking. "You're going to tell me you have impressive credentials?" "I have a license," Maria replied. "And 1 reference. She's probably biased, but she isn't lying." "I don't need another mother," Roy said flatly. "I've already had 4 caregivers pretending to be one. Every one of them was useless." "Perfect," Maria answered. "I've managed to keep exactly 1 houseplant alive this year, and I'm pretty sure that was just luck." For the briefest moment, something shifted behind Roy's eyes. Not amusement. Not yet. Just the smallest crack in the certainty of how this interview was supposed to unfold. He reached for the glass of water beside him. His hand trembled. Just enough for Maria to notice. "Why are you here?" Roy asked quietly. The question no longer sounded like part of an interview. "I need the job," Maria answered honestly. "I've got a younger brother, 2 eviction notices sitting in my bag and a pair of working hands. I don't do pity and I don't do lies. If you're looking for someone to tell you everything's fine, you've hired the wrong woman. But if you want someone who'll notice when it isn't." She shrugged. "That's something I'm actually good at." Roy said nothing. The silence stretched. Then Maria noticed it. His left shoe. It looked tighter than the right. His ankle was swollen. His breathing was shallower than it should have been. The humor disappeared from her face. How long has your leg looked like that? Roy's expression hardened. That's not your concern. It became my concern about 4 seconds ago. My legs are none of your business. They became my business the moment I noticed what looks like a blood clot. She was already moving. Dropping to one knee beside the wheelchair, she gently examined his ankle despite Roy ordering her to stop. The swelling felt warm. The skin looked discolored. Years of medical training screamed the same warning. She reached for her phone. I'm calling an ambulance. You are not. Maria looked him straight in the eyes. Watch me. By the time the paramedics arrived, Roy had stopped arguing. Hours later, the hospital confirmed what Maria had suspected from the moment she'd seen his leg. A blood clot. Large enough to reach his lungs. Large enough to kill him. Caught with only hours to spare. That evening, from a hospital room he clearly hated, Roy summoned Maria back. She stepped inside, expecting another argument. Instead, Roy looked at her for several long seconds before speaking. 30-day trial. Maria smiled. Try not to nearly die before payday. For the first time since the accident, Roy Hansen almost laughed. Neither of them noticed Victor Crane standing outside the hospital room, watching through the narrow glass window. Unlike Maria, Victor already knew exactly why Roy had almost died. The summons came just after 7 that evening. A single line from Roy Hansen's assistant, terse and unapologetic. Mr. Hansen will see you now. Maria didn't bother changing out of the clothes she'd worn to the interview that had ended, by her count, in complete failure. She simply returned to the estate, walked past the same marble entryway, and found Roy exactly where she'd left him, seated by the cold fireplace, tablet balanced across his lap, not looking up as she entered. You're not qualified for this, Roy said by way of greeting. You have no experience with spinal injuries of this severity. Your references are adequate at best. And you argued with me for 11 minutes during an interview I didn't ask you to survive. 10 minutes, Maria said. I was watching the clock. Roy finally looked up. That's not the point. No. The point is whether you're planning to hire me before or after you finish listing my flaws, because I'd like to know how much of my evening to budget for insults. Something flickered behind his eyes, irritation mostly, though something else moved beneath it that he didn't have a name for yet. 30 days, he said finally. A trial. You arrive on time every time. You do not interfere with Hansen Dynamics business. You do not touch my personal technology. You do not discuss my condition with anyone outside this house. And you follow my instructions. Fine. Maria didn't hesitate. In return, you attend every scheduled therapy session without arguing me out of it. You take your medication only after I've verified it myself. You stop dismissing medical advice the moment it annoys you. And you call me Maria. Not the caregiver. Roy stared at her for a long moment, clearly unaccustomed to terms being handed back to him. Fine, he said at last, the word clipped and reluctant. It was, Maria would later think, the first honest agreement either of them made. The mansion had been arranged, she quickly realized, to keep Roy exactly as still as his body was. Heavy curtains sealed every window against daylight. She opened them the first morning. A guard closed them again by noon. She opened them a second time and stood there until no one dared touch them a third. She moved his breakfast from the dim office to the terrace, where morning light fell warm across the table. She played old rhythm and blues records during his stretching sessions, ignoring his protests that music was unnecessary. She spoke to him plainly during personal care, no hovering apology in every sentence, and told the guards flanking his wheelchair transfers to give the man room to breathe. Roy found her, by his own quiet admission, infuriating. But within a week he was eating full meals again, sleeping through most nights, reviewing Hansen Dynamics quarterly reports he'd abandoned months earlier, correcting her deliberately wrong statements about server architecture with something that almost resembled amusement, meeting her sarcasm with dry replies of his own, delivered so flatly she sometimes missed the joke until it had already landed. The spasm hit near midnight, violent and sudden, his lower body seizing beyond his control. Roy's jaw locked around a sound he refused to let escape. Maria moved fast and clean, stabilizing his legs, checking his pressure, keeping her voice level. Tell me about the failed Hansen prototype. The one from 2019. The one everyone pretends didn't happen. Get out, he ground out. No. She didn't look away from him, didn't flinch from what his body was doing without his permission. I'm not looking at you like you're broken. I'm looking at you like you're in pain. Those are not the same thing. The spasm passed a long minute later, leaving him hollowed out and breathing hard. Thank you, he said quietly. It cost him something to say it. She let the silence hold it without comment. 20 minutes after his evening dose, Roy's words began to slur. His eyes lost focus. He should have felt calmer, not gone. Maria checked the label. Correct. She examined the pills themselves against the medical database on her phone, comparing imprint codes with rising unease. Sedatives. Strong ones. Nothing close to what his chart required. She looked toward the locked hallway where the medical staff came and went, where executives passed through with keycards and clipped nods, and felt something cold settle into place. Roy, she whispered. I don't think your health is failing. I think someone is making it fail. You switched something, Roy said flatly, the moment Maria set her phone on the table between them. Or mislabeled it. Tell me which. Neither. Maria didn't flinch from the accusation. She'd expected it. Look. She pulled up the photographs first, the pills side by side, official prescription against what she'd found in his container. Different shape. Different imprint code. She followed with his pharmacy records, then a timeline she'd built over 3 sleepless hours. Every documented episode of confusion, weakness, disorientation, mapped precisely against the days his medication had been switched. Roy studied it in silence, jaw tight, eyes moving across the evidence like he was searching for a flaw that would let him dismiss it. He didn't find one. Who has access to my medication? He said instead, voice clipped. Your private physician. The medical supply coordinator. Marcus. Victor's executive assistant. Mansion staff who handled deliveries. Maria watched him carefully. A short list. Which should make this easier to solve. Marcus will look into it. Quietly. Roy's hand moved toward his tablet, already composing instructions. Whoever did this may already know I found it, Maria said. I'd move faster than quietly. Roy didn't answer. He didn't get the chance to. Victor Crane arrived an hour later with 3 board members and a corporate attorney trailing behind him, his concern arranged as carefully as his tailored coat. He crossed the room and rested a hand on Roy's shoulder, warm and familiar, performing loyalty for an audience. We just want to make sure you're supported, Victor said. Given everything. The board members didn't wait long before producing documents, temporary leadership provisions, they called them, granting Victor authority over company voting rights, the AI patent portfolio, financial accounts, emergency executive powers. All of it framed in language designed to sound like kindness. Given your condition. Until you are yourself again. For the protection of your legacy. They spoke about Roy in the third person while he sat 3 feet away. Maria watched his hand tighten on the wheelchair joystick, watched him hold his composure through sheer force of will. She entered with his scheduled medication just as one board member murmured that his judgment couldn't be relied upon in his current state. Which prediction? Maria asked. The room turned toward her. Victor's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. Excuse me, the attorney said. Which business prediction proves he's incompetent? Maria set the pills down, unhurried. Because while unknowingly sedated on medication someone switched without his knowledge, Roy predicted a competitor's battery recall 3 weeks early. He flagged a regulatory change before it was announced. He secured an energy contract everyone else in this room said was impossible. He anticipated a supply chain disruption that saved this company 11 figures. Silence. You keep speaking as though the chair damaged his mind, Maria said. It didn't. But those documents might damage his company. Victor watched her with something unreadable behind his calm. Everyone out, Roy said before Maria could say more. His voice was quiet. Absolute. The moment the door closed, Roy turned on her. You disobeyed a direct instruction. You let them talk over you, Maria said. You let them, Roy, because some part of you is starting to believe what they're saying. That's not true. She gestured toward the sealed curtains, the dark company screens gathering dust in the corner. You don't have to believe you're weak for them to win. You only have to keep hiding. You have no idea, Roy said low and furious, what it feels like to lose control of your own body. No, Maria said. But I know what it feels like to wake up every day with no control over what crisis is waiting for me. The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with something she wasn't ready to explain. Roy studied her, the anger in his face shifting briefly into something more curious. She didn't give him the chance to ask. Outside, Victor slid into the back of his car, already dialing. The nurse found the medication, he said, voice low and even. Move to the second contingency. He ended the call and looked back once at the mansion's darkened windows. Inside, unnoticed by anyone in the house, Roy's wheelchair control system quietly began downloading an unauthorized software update. "You're punishing me," Roy said, refusing to move toward the therapy room. "You enjoy this. Deciding when I eat, when I stretch, when I'm allowed to rest. I enjoy watching you get stronger." Maria kept pace beside his chair as he wheeled himself away from her, more out of stubbornness than direction. "You're not angry at me, Roy. You're angry at the board, at Victor, at a body that won't do what you tell it. You're just aiming it at the person standing closest. Don't psychoanalyze me. Then stop giving me material." Their voices carried into the mansion's upper gallery, echoing off marble near the grand staircase, neither of them noticing how close he'd drifted to the top step until his chair jerked forward without warning. Roy released the joystick instinctively. The chair kept accelerating. "Roy." He hit the manual override. Nothing. The wheels spun faster, controls unresponsive beneath his hands, the staircase rushing toward him with nowhere to redirect the momentum. Maria ran alongside, grabbing the frame, throwing her weight against it. The reinforced steel didn't yield an inch. Seconds. That was all that remained. She dropped low, hands scrambling beneath the armrest for the manual release lever she'd memorized from the equipment manual her first night on the job. A detail she'd absorbed out of habit, never expecting to need it. Her fingers found it. Pulled. The wheels locked hard, throwing Roy forward against the restraint straps as the chair shuddered to a stop 11 inches from the first step. Maria hit the floor beside him, shoulders slamming into marble, pain exploding white behind her eyes. She didn't move for a moment, just breathed, staring up at the ceiling while her heartbeat slowly stopped trying to escape her chest. Roy looked down the staircase. Then at her. His face had gone the color of ash. "Another few seconds," he said quietly, "and I'd be dead." The technician Hansen Dynamics sent called it a battery synchronization error. Routine. Unfortunate. Nothing more. Maria didn't believe it for a second, and neither, once he reviewed the diagnostic log himself, did Roy. "Safety limitations were disabled," he said, scrolling through data with a stillness Maria recognized as barely restrained fury. The chair accepted a remote command. "Through the mansion's private network." He stopped. And someone erased half the diagnostic history afterward. He couldn't deny it any longer. This wasn't malfunction. This was murder, attempted in broad daylight, dressed up as an accident. "Marcus." Roy's voice was flat. "Lock down the estate." Maria refused the medic's exam for her shoulder, checking her watch instead, already halfway to the door. "Another job," Roy said, something bitter creeping into his voice. "You're dividing your attention." Marcus, standing quietly near the doorway, cleared his throat. "Her brother received an eviction notice this morning, sir. She's going home to help him." Roy said nothing. An hour later, against her clear objection, he sent a driver anyway, and went with it. The apartment was small. Overcrowded. Overdue bills stacked on a table beneath a photograph of a woman who shared Maria's eyes. In the corner, a young man, Daniel, sat hunched over a half-disassembled computer built from scavenged parts. Roy understood, standing in that doorway, exactly how much Maria had been carrying without a single complaint. "I can erase your debts," he said. "Find you both somewhere better. I accepted employment, Mr. Hansen." Maria's voice was quiet, unshaken. "I did not sell you the right to rescue me." Roy recognized the pride in her refusal because it was his own. On the drive back, Roy stared out the window at the passing dark. "After the crash," he said, "people stopped asking what I wanted. They started deciding what was best for me." "That's exactly why I said no to your money," Maria replied. Neither said anything else, but something between them had shifted, quietly, unmistakably. Back in the cramped apartment, Daniel pulled up the photograph Maria had taken of the wheelchair's diagnostic screen, zooming into a corner of code she hadn't noticed. A hidden authorization string, buried beneath the visible error log. He frowned, cross-referencing it against an old archived Hansen Dynamics database he'd once helped decommission. The same string appeared there too, issued years earlier from a senior executive account. Maria found the tablet while cataloging medical equipment in a storage closet she hadn't been given clearance to before. A cracked, water-damaged device sealed inside an evidence case, tucked behind boxes no one had touched in months. Roy went white the moment he saw it in her hands. "Put that back," he said, voice unlike anything she'd heard from him before, not anger but something closer to grief wearing anger's clothes. "What is it?" "Samuels." The word came out clipped, final. "My driver. My friend. It's one of the last things they recovered from the car. Maria set it down carefully. It might contain diagnostic data. From the crash. I know what it might contain. Roy stared at the case like it might detonate. I've had it for 6 months and never opened it. He didn't give permission that day. But 2 days later, without explanation, he told her to bring Daniel to the mansion. Daniel arrived under Marcus's watchful escort, thoroughly unimpressed by the marble floors and untouched by the Hansen name. Your internal encryption is a decade out of date, he said within the first 10 minutes, scrolling through the tablet's corrupted files. Honestly embarrassing for a company that builds AI systems. It was current when it was installed, Roy said stiffly. Installed when the Clinton administration? Roy's mouth twitched despite himself. By the end of the afternoon, the two of them were arguing over firmware architecture with the easy hostility of men who respected each other more than either wanted to admit. Then Daniel went quiet. He'd recovered fragments of the vehicle's final system log, data no one had extracted before now. Roy leaned in as the sequence assembled itself on the screen, and Maria watched his face change with every line. Remote override accepted. Emergency braking disabled. Manual steering input rejected. Doors locked automatically. The override initiated 11 seconds before the vehicle left the bridge. Authorization, executive-level Hansen Dynamics account. Roy stared at the timestamp like it might rearrange itself into something less true. 6 months, he said quietly. 6 months I believed my technology failed him. That I built something that couldn't be trusted. He didn't look up. Someone used it as a weapon instead. Later that night, Roy admitted what he'd carried alone since the crash. He'd designed the override system himself. Approved the demonstration that put Samuel behind the wheel. Ignored Samuel's offhand comment that morning about irregular diagnostic readings, dismissing it as nothing. I did that, Roy said. Those choices were mine. They were. Maria didn't soften it, didn't offer the comfort he might have expected. But someone else chose murder, Roy. Responsibility and guilt aren't the same thing. You made mistakes. You didn't kill him. Roy said nothing for a long time. But something in his shoulders loosened just slightly, like a weight shifting rather than lifting. Exhaustion caught up with him hours later, reviewing records until his arms trembled with fatigue. He refused help transferring from his chair, insisting he could manage, until his strength gave out mid-motion and he began to fall. Maria caught him. For several long seconds, he was braced against her, stripped of every defense he usually kept armored around himself. Let go, he said, voice rough. Not until you're seated. She held steady until he was safely settled, then stepped back, giving him room to breathe. I hate you seeing me like this, Roy admitted, quiet and raw. I've seen you cruel, Maria said. Frightened. Drugged. Arrogant. Half-conscious. Needing help isn't the worst thing I've witnessed from you. Then what is? Watching you pretend you don't need anyone. The air between them shifted, charged with something neither had named yet. Roy's eyes held hers, and for a moment the distance between them nearly disappeared entirely. Marcus's urgent knock broke it apart. Sir. The board's called an emergency vote. 4 days. His expression was grim. Victor intends to have you declared medically incapable. Permanently. At the same moment, Daniel's voice rose from the next room. Roy, the authorization on the crash log. It routed through multiple accounts before it hit the system. He looked up pale. One of them belongs to Victor Crane. They moved fast after that, racing to copy the evidence before anything could disappear. They weren't fast enough. The mansion's power cut without warning, plunging the room into darkness. When the backup system hummed back to life moments later, the tablet was gone from the table where they'd left it. Someone had been in Roy's private office. Marcus found no broken locks, no forced entry, no sign of a stranger anywhere in the house. Whoever had taken the tablet had walked through Roy's private office with the ease of someone who belonged there. Suspicion spread through the household like smoke through vents, silent, choking, impossible to see the source of. Roy responded the only way he knew how. He doubled security. Confined Maria to the estate. Ordered Daniel kept at a distance. Sealed the investigation behind doors even Maria couldn't access. The warmth that had been building between them for weeks vanished, replaced by the cold, controlling man she'd first met. You're isolating yourself again, Maria said, watching him retreat behind locked screens and clipped instructions. I'm keeping you alive, Roy said, not looking up. There's a difference. She left anyway. Slipping past the increased security took longer than it should have, but the pull toward her brother's safety outweighed every rule Roy had imposed. She noticed the black sedan trailing her bus 2 stops before her own, noticed the 2 men positioned too casually outside Daniel's apartment building. Inside, Daniel was pale, the apartment ransacked, his backup drive missing. "They were here," he said. "They took everything." They didn't have time to process it before footsteps sounded on the stairwell, deliberate, closing in. Maria pulled Daniel toward the rear exit, hands shaking, mind racing through options that all ended badly. A man lunged for Daniel's arm on the fire escape landing. Maria swung the extinguisher from the wall without thinking, catching him across the shoulder hard enough to buy them 3 seconds. 3 seconds was enough. She pulled Daniel into the crowded convenience store below, disappearing into customers and fluorescent light until Marcus's team arrived, breathless, minutes later. They'd become targets. There was no more room to pretend otherwise. Roy was waiting when she returned, fury and terror tangled together on his face in a way he didn't bother hiding. "You violated my instructions. Your instructions would have left my brother undefended." Roy's jaw tightened. He didn't argue the point. Instead, he slid a folder across the table. 6 months' salary, a secured apartment out of state, transportation arranged, new identities available if needed. "Your employment is over," he said. Maria stared at him, understanding arriving slower than it should have. This wasn't punishment. It was fear wearing punishment's face. She picked up the check. Enough to erase every debt she'd carried for years, enough to secure Daniel's entire future. She tore it in half. "You're not protecting me," she said. "You're choosing for me because losing control frightens you more than losing me does. Everyone close to me becomes leverage." Roy's voice cracked slightly around the words. Maria stepped closer. "Then stop treating love like a security failure." The word landed between them and stayed there, neither of them reaching to claim it or deny it. "I'll leave," Maria said quietly, "only if you look at me and tell me you feel nothing." Roy opened his mouth, closed it, said nothing at all. "When I heard they tried to take Daniel," he admitted finally, voice raw, "I felt as helpless as I did inside that car before it went off the bridge." Maria knelt in front of his chair, bringing their eyes level. "Helplessness is a moment, Roy. It's not who you are." He looked at her like she'd handed him something he hadn't known he was starving for. The kiss that followed was slow at first, careful, restrained, and then something in both of them broke loose at once, fear and relief tangling into something neither could have named a week ago. Marcus's voice cut through the moment, urgent and grim. "Sir." Victor moved the board meeting. "It's tomorrow morning." Roy pulled back slightly, still close enough to feel Maria's breath, the weight of everything they hadn't said yet still sitting unresolved between them. By sunrise he could lose everything he'd built. He looked at Maria, something steady settling into his expression for the first time in days. "Then tomorrow," he said, "I stop hiding." They worked through the night, the mansion's war room lit by tablet screens and the low hum of urgency. Daniel produced the crash data first, a hidden backup he'd created before the apartment search, saved off-grid where no one could reach it. "I don't trust anything with a login screen anymore," he said, sliding it across the table. Maria laid out everything she'd preserved. The switched medication sample, photographs of the original bottle, refill records naming the account that had ordered the change, wheelchair diagnostic screenshots, and the full timeline connecting Roy's worst episodes to his sedation. Marcus added the final piece: payments from a shell corporation, threading back to an account controlled by Victor Crane. Roy contacted federal investigators before dawn, then a board member he still trusted. He built the plan carefully, methodically, the version of himself Maria hadn't fully seen until now. He kept one detail from her. She noticed but didn't press. Getting ready that morning felt different than any other. Maria helped him into the navy 3-piece suit, her hands steady, unhurried, the moment intimate without being fragile. When his arms failed halfway through the transfer into his wheelchair, Roy stopped, breathing hard, refusing to simply grit through it the way he once would have. "Assistance or audience?" Maria asked quietly. "Assistance," Roy said. It was such a small word. It cost him nothing to say it now and everything to have learned how. The black vehicles rolled into the Hanson Dynamics Plaza just after 8, employees already gathering behind the glass lobby walls, phones lifting before anyone gave the order. Roy moved through the entrance in his wheelchair, Marcus and security flanking him, spine straight, eyes forward. Maria walked beside him in blue scrubs, cream bag over her shoulder, not touching the chair, not pushing, simply present. Victor froze near the elevators, composure cracking for exactly one visible second before he recovered it, stepping forward with practiced concern. "Roy, I wasn't expecting." You've been speaking for me long enough, Roy said, voice carrying across the lobby. Phones kept recording. Whatever Victor had planned to say about Roy's absence, his confusion, his supposed decline, it evaporated in front of an audience that could see him clearly for the first time in months. Before the boardroom doors, Roy paused. You changed my life in less than a week, he said quietly. I didn't change anything. Maria met his eyes. I just made enough noise for you to notice you still had one. Roy almost smiled. When this is over, we're discussing what comes next. That, Maria said, sounds suspiciously like optimism. The boardroom was already tense when they entered, Victor seated at the head of the table like he'd never expected to relinquish it. He waited until Roy was settled before sliding a document across the polished wood. A medical declaration, Victor said, calm and rehearsed. Signed by Dr. Alistair Reyes. It states, in his professional opinion, that you're currently experiencing cognitive instability consistent with. Roy's eyes dropped to the signature. His own physician's name, unmistakable, sitting beneath a diagnosis Roy had never received, never discussed, never consented to. I move for an immediate vote, Victor said, addressing the room instead of Roy, exactly as he'd done for weeks. For the protection of this company, and for Roy's own well-being. Hands began reaching for tablets. Voting screens illuminated around the table. Roy looked at the declaration bearing his doctor's forged concern, then at Victor's calm, expectant face, and understood that everything they'd gathered through the night was about to be tested in the next 60 seconds. Victor controlled the room the way he'd controlled it for months, smooth, patient, building his case sentence by sentence. Roy has refused every public appearance for 6 months, he said, addressing the board rather than Roy directly. He's suffered documented confusion, erratic judgment. And now he's emotionally entangled with an unqualified caregiver whose motives no one has examined. Roy let him finish. He'd learned, this past week, that some battles were won by allowing the other man to talk himself into a corner. Then the doors opened and Maria walked in. She placed the altered medication bottle on the table without ceremony, explaining its effects in clear, clinical terms. Daniel's face appeared on the boardroom display seconds later, the recovered vehicle logs scrolling behind him. The timeline, the override, the 11 seconds before the bridge. Roy followed with the financial trail. The medication supplier, the wheelchair technician, both funneling payments through shell companies that traced back, layer by layer, to Victor Crane. Fabricated, Victor snapped, color rising in his face. This woman and her brother invented all of it to position themselves near my fortune. He turned toward the door. Security removed them. No one moved. I replaced your security personnel this morning, Roy said quietly. With federal agents. The doors opened. Investigators stepped through, and Victor's composure shattered in real time. He lunged for Maria before anyone could react, one arm locking around her, something hard and metallic pressed against her side as he dragged her toward the private elevator. The doors sealed shut before the agents crossed half the room. Everyone told Roy to wait for law enforcement. Instead, he pulled up the building's central control system, the same architecture he'd personally designed years earlier, and locked the elevator between floors before Victor could reach the parking level. Victor's mistake was assuming Roy's body made him powerless. It never had. Internal cameras activated. Audio fed live into the boardroom display. Inside the elevator, Maria understood immediately what Roy needed. She looked at Victor, calm despite the weapon against her ribs. You've spent your whole career managing what Roy built. That must eat at you. Second place, forever, to a man in a wheelchair. Victor's control cracked. He took everything. The board would never choose me while he remained capable of anything. His voice rose, unraveling. The crash was supposed to end him. Samuel wasn't supposed to matter, he was collateral, nothing more. The sedatives were meant to finish what the crash started, destroy his credibility slowly enough that no one would ask questions. The wheelchair failure was supposed to complete it. He looked directly at Maria, fury bleeding into something almost plaintive. You ruined everything. Trained professionals missed what you noticed in a week. Every word transmitted clearly into the boardroom, recorded, witnessed, irreversible. Victor grabbed for the control panel, trying to override the lock. Roy isolated the network instantly, seizing full command, the same class of remote authority that had once sent his car over a bridge now working, finally, in the other direction. He lowered the elevator slowly toward the secure maintenance level where agents waited. As the doors opened, Maria swung her metal water bottle hard across Victor's wrist. The weapon clattered free. Agents moved in fast, pulling Victor from the elevator before he found his balance. He looked toward the camera, chest heaving. You still can't stand against me, Roy? Roy's voice came through the elevator speaker, even and unshaken. You mistook standing for power, he said. That was your first failure. Victor was dragged away, still shouting something no one bothered to listen to anymore. Maria returned to the boardroom minutes later, shaken but steady. Roy reached for her hand in front of the board, the investigators, the employees still crowding the glass walls outside. She took it. The removal motion died without a single vote in favor. Hansen Dynamics belonged to Roy again, fully, undeniably, in front of everyone who tried to convince the world otherwise. Maria studied him for a long moment, something gentler than triumph in her expression. Now that the fight is over, she asked quietly, what exactly are you planning to live for? Victor Crane was charged within the week. Attempted murder, corporate sabotage, medical tampering, conspiracy, kidnapping, and finally Samuel's death. Roy's physician, confronted with the evidence, admitted he'd been bribed through a clinic employee, his reports manipulated line by line over months. 3 board members resigned before the month ended. Roy resumed full leadership but not the way he once had. He announced governance reforms within his first week back, checks that ensured no single executive could ever again gain the kind of unchecked authority Victor had quietly built for himself. He visited Samuel's grave for the first time since the crash on a gray Tuesday morning, Maria waiting several yards back until he lifted a hand for her to join him. I avoided this place, Roy admitted, because surviving felt like betrayal. The best way to honor him, Maria said quietly, isn't staying trapped in the moment he died. Roy set the restored tablet gently at the base of the headstone, letting it sit there a long moment. Then he picked it back up, sliding it into his coat. Not abandonment. Acceptance. He didn't offer to erase Maria's debts again. Instead, he handed her a contract, director of the newly founded Hansen Foundation for Accessible Living and Independent Care, funding adaptive homes, affordable mobility technology, caregiver training, scholarships, and support for families drowning in medical debt the way hers once had. This is real, Maria said carefully, searching his face for the affection she worried might be steering the offer. Not just. You saw problems my entire organization was trained not to see, Roy said. This isn't a gift, Maria. It's a hire. Daniel received a merit-based technology internship the same week, Maria's only condition being that he finish school first. He agreed, though not without pointing out that Hansen Dynamics encryption still needed serious work. The crash didn't just damage my spine, Roy admitted one evening watching daylight stretch across a room that had stayed dark for months. It broke my trust in the company, in my own technology, in my judgment, in people. He paused. In myself. Your life didn't end on that bridge, Roy, Maria said. You just stopped living it. You made continuing impossible to avoid. I didn't save your life. She shook her head, almost smiling. I annoyed you until you decided to save it yourself. He kissed her then, unhurried, certain, nothing like the fear-charged moment in the boardroom's shadow. Just quiet and deliberate, 2 people choosing each other with nothing left to survive. The curtains stayed open now, permanently, daylight filling the office that had once felt like a tomb. The imposing sculpture that had greeted Maria on her first day was gone entirely. What happened to it? She asked. It had an unpleasant personality, Roy said. Maria laughed. Does my new job include breaking expensive decorations? Only the ugly ones. The mansion filled with people the day the foundation launched. Employees, staff, Daniel weaving through the crowd with a drink he probably wasn't old enough to be holding. Roy moved through the room independently in his wheelchair, and Maria walked beside him, not behind him. He still couldn't move his legs. Still had difficult days, pain that never fully left. But the chair was no longer the whole of his story, just one part of a much larger one still being written. Maria Talbert had entered Roy Hansen's mansion late, disorganized, and one mistake away from being thrown out. Days later, the traitor was gone, the curtains were open, and Roy had reclaimed more than his company. She had not taught him how to walk again. She had reminded him that moving forward had never required legs. Some people save you by fixing what's broken. Maria saved Roy by refusing to let him hide from what was still whole. If Roy and Maria's story stayed with you, drop a comment on the moment that hit hardest, and follow for more slow-burn romances where love shows up wearing scrubs, sarcasm, and zero patience for self-pity.